is a framework for archival advocacy. Is it going to echo?
Cool.
And then it should. No, you need to have it.
I just want to know that people are watching. It's very intense.
So
Is your mom on Zoom, are you?
Yeah, there we go. Oh, no.
The sound.
Is the speaker off?
There we go. Now my audio is on. And it's not echoing.
Okay.
Can people on Zoom hear us? I think those,
Nobody's answering, so I have concerns.
yeah, I think the red light is the lights are on.
Oh, they can hear us.
Okay, I just I like
They can hear us?
Can you hear us now? Yes. Okay. We'll get there.
And take one.
As I said in the last session I moderated where we had tech problems, it's not a conference unless you have tech problems, right? Okay, so I'm gonna so what we're gonna do, and hopefully we'll have time for questions. If we don't, what we did in the last session was the speakers kind of just hung out afterwards, and if you had a question, so just if you can save questions till the end, if we don't have time, you can stalk them during the conference. So and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to come over here. So actually the people online can see me at least once. Hello, everyone.
That's Stacey. Woo.
I'm the curator of manuscripts and cello music at the Blakeney Hodges Special Collections and Archives at UNC-G. Today I'm going to introduce our presentation and then go into our panel. So we're going to be discussing the importance of community living. And I hope you liked it. This is a cute spider, right? I think this is not a creepy spider. So I was going for a cute spider. So by community webbing, we're referring to organically developed interrelationships with members of a particular community. And these relationships can't span time and space. So you can be part of a community web that belongs to a person or an organization that existed before you were ever born and still be benefiting and connecting with people through that web. And that will hopefully make more sense if I'm doing my job properly in a minute. So with different, we can be parts of different community webs, and some of these webs may overlap. So as an archivist, when we do donor relations and stewardship, when we are doing community outreach, we are, and if this outreach is successful and these relationships are built, we become part of that community's web. So we go from being on the outside to the inside and part of it. If we have different collecting areas, which many of us do, we may be parts of different webs. So for example, I am a part of several different webs because our collecting area for the manuscripts collection encompasses a very broad range. So it's local and regional history, creative writing, the visual and performing arts, and women's history. And then also the cello music collection. And some of these webs overlap a great deal, and some never seem to touch each other, and that's perfectly fine. When you have multiple archivists who are in charge of for different curatorial areas, your department will be the beneficiary of several different webs. So through that person, the organization kind of enters, and when you are part of a web, someone else in your department can also benefit from that web. I may not know the person, someone, but Kathelene or Beth may know the person, or may be able to get me a contact in that web. So these are beneficial relationships to know, and it's good to always communicate with your colleagues, and we tend to be siloed. This is another good reason you can always benefit from more interconnection. So this is one of the more simplistic webs I'm associated with, which is the cello music collection. So it's cellists. That's pretty much it. I am not a musician at all. I do not have a music degree. I took music appreciation as an undergrad, though. So that was my experience coming into working with this collection. And I'm in kind of the, I guess, purple color under the Violoncello Society there. So you see me, I entered that working with this collection in 2011. And the founder of the collection is Elizabeth Howling, who was a faculty member at our institution. So everyone whose name isn't Black, they actually ended up donating the collections, and this is the date they donated. So I was from being a part of UNCG, I became a part of Elizabeth Howling's web. And you can see interconnections with people and organizations. So the organizations are the dashed lines. Many of her connections were through the New York Violoncello Society. And that that web, that particular organizational web, represents a lot of the early donors to the cello music collection. So this is an example of a community web being based on an organization. My contact was tangentially through a person by being associated with another organization, UNCG. Later on, I connected with a student of a cellist whose collection we also had. He had been president of the New York Violoncello Society. We ended up with his collection. His student eventually became president. She reached out to me, and I ended up on the board. So I ended up overlapping on the same web, both more direct contact. You can see the blue dashes, weirdly, University of Indiana, Bloomington, we just get a lot of cellists from them. And that has been very profitable for us in terms of collecting. And one aspect of this, especially in musicianship, is if you have the teacher, you're probably going to get the students. So if you think of how many students an individual teacher produces, and then of course you narrow it down by the ones you want, that can be a very important relationship to you. And you can see time-wise, Elizabeth Howling knew Martha Gershevsky. I was like 8 years old when Elizabeth Howling died. I never met her, but in 2022, her web was still paying off for our collection. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about these relationships through time and space. And you can see I was very dependent on the other webs, but as I became more well-known in my position, I began growing my own web, and that ended up actually redundantly going back to the other webs because it's a very small world in the classical music world. So when you think of mapping out relationships we have with people who are connected to us in some way, even if we didn't know them. This is what we're talking about with webbing. This is an example of, I said, donor web. And you can build this for community outreach. You can build this with a professional organization like SNCCA. There's all sorts of ways you can build this out. We continue to grow, which is wonderful and also scary because these collections can be rather large. But this is also a good example of just how some of these people never came to the United States and they're in my web. And they never spoke English, yet they're still in my web in some way. So this is a very complex matter. And you can imagine when you are collecting in a less specific area, something more broad like local history or regional history, you would have to render things in 3D. It would get quite complicated. But this also helps you track how you bring in collections, where you might have holes in collections, where you might have biases in collections because it's a person you know of a person you know who knew a person. So I found this way of mapping very useful. So next up, just as the introduction, Kate and I are going to talk about expanding community connections in relation to the web we worked with a Jewish history project.
And I don't think we all did introductions, although I'm Kate Ainsley, was a student when I assisted with this project, have now graduated with my MLIS degree. So yay, thank you. But just to further introductions as well.
So to give you some background of this project, we in our department work very heavily with the public history graduate program at UNC-G in particular, and Parsons. And she had been looking for ways to document our local Jewish history. So in 2019, she began working with a colleague of mine, Erin Lorimore, who trained a student to go into Temple Emmanuel, that's our Reform Jewish institution in Greensboro, to process and organize the temple's archives. Then she worked with my colleague, David Flynn, who some of you probably know, is our digitization coordinator. And he has been digitizing the temple archives. And then COVID happened. And we, in 2024, began talking about starting an oral history project because we realized there were many elders in the community and we needed to get their history, and oral histories were going to be one of the fastest ways to do this. So as part of this project, we had Anne, when you think about, I'm not from Greensboro. I am Jewish, but that's like not a secret membership card, so people don't know me. I know the vocabulary, so that was helpful. Anne is a member of Temple Emmanuel, and her children were going to the Jewish Day School and the B'nai Shalom, and she also had membership at the Conservative Synagogue of David. So we're dealing with we already, through our UNC-G connection, have several relationships and webs with different organizations, but she was not like the most embedded person. So we reached out to a colleague of mine, or a colleague of ours now, Marilyn Foreman-Chandler. So Marilyn Foreman-Chandler is the most amazing person you've ever met. She is also the most modest person you've ever met. And when I've worked with a lot of different communities. I've worked with Black churches, I've worked with the LGBTQ communities. When you are not a member and you are not a local and you don't have a lot of things with that group, the ways you can usually align yourself and try to build a relationship with the community, build trust with the community, is one, align with an organization, find a community organization that supports you, or find that very special person who is so committed into the community that they are going, by virtue of their reputation, people are going to open their doors to you. And in this case, that was Marilyn. Marilyn had been the president of the Greensboro Jewish Federation, which basically collaborates with every Jewish institution in Greensboro, and she also has memberships beyond. And she was so well respected that people were pretty much willing to open their doors to us, to strangers. So we teamed up with Marilyn, with a camera, and that was a difficult thing to get because they don't know who I am. So we decided, we had about a list. We were originally going to start with around 10 or 15 oral histories. We ended up presently with around 45 oral histories. I did some of them. There's no way I could possibly do all of them. So we created a GA position, enter Kate. And Kate became Marilyn's partner in doing these oral histories. So that was a wonderful experience. Just to give you a bit of background before we talk about the oral history, so you understand some of the dynamics of the community. The Jewish community in Greensboro, the big names that you know or would know, arrived in the 20th century. And they were Germanic, so they were mostly from the Germanic speaking areas. They were coming down for industry. So they were, Schiffman's jewelers. They were Schiffman's. The first Jewish services in Greensboro were held above the Schiffman store on the second floor. The Cohns were probably the biggest names. Charles Weil, who his family was huge in real estate. We have his son's papers. These are names that if you drive through Greensboro, you're going to recognize them. The LeBauers, the Sternbergers, and so forth. The Tangers, yeah. And one distinct feature you figure out if you're looking at Jewish history in Greensboro is it's actually a little bit difficult to track, because unless you know what a Jewish name sounds like, you don't really see the Jewish culture in Greensboro. Because very intentionally from the beginning, and when the kind of founders of the community arrived, that German group, they made a conscious choice to assimilate and fit in with the general community as much as they could. So the first synagogue in Temple in Greensboro, which is the one on the far left, that was actually a church originally. And the one in the middle top, that is the location they had built for themselves. And it looks very much like you would expect a church to look. It looks a lot like a church on the inside too. And all of this was intentional. The Jewish families of the temple wanted to support the Greensboro community, not just do Jewish philanthropy. So they did a lot of work in the community, funding the arts, funding culture, and their names are all over the place, but because of this. But you don't necessarily speak of them or think of them in terms of their Jewishness, and that was what we were trying to achieve with this particular set of interviews. Later on, a new wave entered the Jewish community, and these were people who are Jewish people that were immigrating from Eastern Europe. So they were the ones, escaping anti-Semitism during prior or after World War II or the pogroms in Russia. And they were a bit culturally different. They are probably more what you would expect from a Jewish person to sound like. They sound a little bit more like Jerry Seinfeld. While the earlier Jewish community members have a very thick Southern accent. So they were culturally a bit different, and they wanted to be a part of a distinctly Jewish community, which was at odds with the earlier group. And as the congregation grew, there was a group that decided they wanted more conservative ritual practices, and they became the Conservative Synagogue Beth David. And they also wanted a larger temple for themselves, the Reformed congregation. And there was a lot of debate in the community because the older families associated their lives with the older temple, while the other ones wanted something more representative and bigger. And the Jefferson Road campus of Temple Emmanuel became the result of that. It looks much more like a synagogue. You go in, this is definitely not a church. And that is the more commonly used temple, but they still do have services once a month at the Green Street one. So there is this divide in the oral histories when we speak to people of the people who were here from families early on, who were very assimilated, versus the people who came later and came down for jobs, and they associate their Jewishness more like you would expect in the north.
So talking about the interviews, that's really where I come in. We wanted to focus on elders of the community because, of course, they're older in age. They're more likely to pass away. And I think we've had one person pass away since recording their oral history. So again, 44 people interviewed. That's a lot. I definitely think me and Marilyn really cultivated a really good working relationship of our goal, yes, was 10 to 15, and we started exceeding that. And we're like, oh, let's just keep going, let's see what we do. And questions when it came to the interviews, yes, they were given ahead of time, but we also took time when individuals were answering said question. If they mentioned something else, we really took the time to dive down and go down those rabbit holes and find newer information. And like Stacey said, these were mostly done at their residence. So, you know, we're literally showing up on their doorstep with a camera and a microphone and asking them to tell us about their life and their familial relations, which for a lot of individuals is really hard in this community. And I'm also speaking as somebody who's not from Greensboro and who's not of the Jewish community. So I was very much an outsider, but I think the one thing that really gave me my in was I was young. And what do we all know about older individuals? They love to tell you their stories when you are a young person. So I got offered a lot of snacks and a lot of drinks and got told many a story, not even pertinent to the information that we were collecting. But that was always a really nice. And so these are some of our sample questions. We asked everybody the same set of questions. Now, again, we went down rabbit holes of different stories, but by asking everybody the same question, we got to highlight similarities and differences between individuals. So I remember specifically, we had 3 interviews back to back that each member had lost their father before the age of 13. And you're like, that's interesting, of a connection that these 3 people within one web or maybe multiple webs that they're connected, that all have this similarity that seems odd. But it was mentioned during these interviews. And again, by doing the same questions, you notice these similarities, these differences. And also through asking these questions, you know, we're videoing. So, and for me, I wasn't the individual asking the question. It was very much behind the camera, like hoping and praying there was enough storage left. And I was watching body language. So while Marilyn was asking questions, again, she's our in to this, to these groups of people. I was watching body language and how they answered questions. And so many individuals, we start off with questions about their family. Who are your parents? Where are they from? How did they get to Greensboro? And very reserved. They don't want to talk about their family. They don't want to talk about where they come from. And so getting that information, it required very soft entry points. But then when you get to business, when you get to their grandchildren or even great-grandchildren in some cases, you know, the door opens wide up and let me tell you everything, because those conversations are more comfortable to them. When we talk about the Jewish settlement in Greensboro, there is a lot of trauma with that behind those stories. So, you know, starting off with that, it could have been a misfire for a lot of these interviews, but you start off very soft in those, and the way Marilyn presented these questions was very much a hand holding at the beginning. And then oftentimes when you start expressing these stories of like, yes, I was really into business. I learned that from my father. Talk about more about your relationship with your father. That opens up more conversations. And again, those rabbit holes. So, you know, it was really important for me being able to view these things and also being separated. But then going back to community webbing, is there anyone else we can talk to? The amount of times we stayed 20, 30 minutes after we were supposed to leave talking about, oh, well, did you know whose son just got married? Or she's single and she just moved back from college. Isn't this great? So all of these conversations, you know, the more individuals of today and who are you connected to outside of this community? How do your webs grow? And how, like, are there any individuals that you think might be interested in this that are from the area that maybe we don't know about. So using your initial contact, making future contacts, making future contacts. So that was something that we really got to do through these questions.
So we discovered a few themes. We're still analyzing a lot. This is an ongoing project, and there was definitely this divide between the older families and the newer families. A lot of the people we interviewed were members of the older families because we started, they were also old elders themselves. We started with people that had name recognition who probably had done oral history or interviews of some form before. And this division is actually a really good research topic for someone if they're looking for a topic.
I already talked about business and philanthropy. So when we talk about individuals coming to the area and we talk about assimilation, specifically that second bullet point, the meaningful part of the Jewish history is often not considered because of that assimilation. And you start to see this disconnect between the two major groups. But through doing this, by doing this project, we start to see, again, those similarities, those differences between the two groups and what that Jewish history really means to the area.
Right. And one thing, I'll end this with the people who were more recent moves. And by more recent, they could have been in Greensboro for 20, 30 years, but we're not one of the old families, let's put it that way. They really struggled to view themselves as being important to the local Jewish history because they were immigrants essentially to the area in some fashion. And it really was a challenge to convince people from this particular angle that their oral histories was important, were important, their materials were important. And that's something, this education about the historic record, that you too represent a particular story in the historic record as a member of the community, that you are a member of the community. This was an ongoing theme that came up that we have been actually working in other ways to try to work towards showing people that their history is important and make it more of an inclusive perspective.
I think like one of the biggest things about this project, I remember during the interview process, like how they asked me, how are you at handling really hard information? I mean, all of us are archivist people sometimes when we look at documents, and it can be the most gut-wrenching thing. And you have years of separation. But I think one of the most impactful oral histories was when I was sitting across from this woman and she was like, I don't have very many memories. My story is not important. And that, of course, like shot through the heart. but taking the time to really showcase to her and to others, even if you're an immigrant to this community, even if you are like a newer Greensboro resident, your stories, your history is still important.
All right, and next up, we have Kathelene. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Kathelene Smith, and I'm the head of the Blakeney Hodges Special Collections and University Archives at UNC-Greensboro. And I am going to expand a little bit on what Stacey and Kate were talking about, and the amazing amount of webbing and overlapping there is that we see in our archives, and the value of this is to the community. And I was thinking when y'all were talking about the fact that none of the people on this panel are actually from Greensboro. And I'm wondering how many of y'all find yourselves in a city or town that is not where you have initial connections and that you grew up in. Probably most of it. So really, you don't have those initial, it's all up to us to make the connections. And sometimes that's a little bit difficult. Let's see. Okay, so I want to start with this image because this is from the recent launch of this Jewish history project that Kate and Stacey were talking about on May 17th, and it went really well. And what part of the exhibit, the great exhibit that Stacey did, was this uniform and artifacts that relate to this man named Buddy Weil. Lots of pronunciations of Weil family. So anyway, Buddy Weil. And so he was very important to the Jewish community, to the Greensboro business community, and he was also a Rotarian. And I want to talk a little bit about the Rotary Club because that's kind of my main connection with the webbing in Greensboro. And it was also my first project when I came, these many years ago, when I first came to the UNCG archives, was this Rotary oral history project that I kind of got involved with. And so it started, I want to talk about Buddy for just one more minute. So that was kind of strange. So it was Rotary Club that I got this position. I was working with the oral history project. And one day I got a call on my cell phone from a Rotarian. And it's one of those kind of things you're like, how did you get my number? But I got beyond that. And he was calling from the driveway of another Rotarian, Buddy Weil, who had just died. And they were going to be dismantling his house. And the woman who was handling the estate was there in the driveway. And she said, do you want this stuff? He said, do you want this stuff? And we were like, I went to Stacey's office, who conveniently is right next door to mine. Like, I've got John on the phone. Do we want this stuff? Yeah. So we went over there to his house, and it started a very interesting relationship with the executor of his will, who was also his very long-suffering secretary of 40 plus years. Like, she must have been almost 90 years old. She was this big, a suit and pumps on, and she was really wonderful. That became a very interesting and somewhat emotionally fraught relationship, getting that from her. But basically, they were both Rotarians, and that was kind of this connection with this Rotary Oral History Project. So the project began in the fall of 2006 when Rotarian and then our chancellor, Pat Sullivan, who you see there, called our archivist and said, are you interested in doing a Rotary oral history project? And the Rotary Club of Greensboro has a chair always available for the chancellor of our university. So that was kind of a natural connection. And so they said yes, and that kind of started it off. And the object of the project was to capture some of the more kind of important groups of the that were in the oral history, what's in the Rotary, but mostly because they wanted to capture the stories of the World War II veterans who were kind of dying off of it, and that's kind of where it went. So it was spearheaded by another member of the Jewish community, Bob Cohn, who became very special to me. I was able to interview him before he died, and we ended up having over 35 oral history interviews, and they're still kind of going. And it was really interesting because for someone who's not from Greensboro, they were really, it was wonderful to hear the stories about how these people grew up, because it was really not the Greensboro I know, of like Christmas parades and going downtown. There was a streetcar that ran through Greensboro, and they were talking about their last streetcar ride. That was really fascinating. And these World War II veterans were just stunning. And that got very emotional too. And they were talking about being overseas. There's these young boys who had never been out of their city who were then finding themselves in the battlefields of Europe. So they were really quite incredible. And some of the people who were very much involved in the civil rights movement in town, as y'all know, Greensboro has a very important civil rights history, and a lot of them talked about that. But about 2015, we began discussing the whole idea of giving the Rotary Club papers to UNCG, which was great because it did capture all these history of the organization, of the town, and of a lot of the Rotarians. So we started talking about that, and sure enough, they ended up coming to us. But some of the records and stories of the people had another interesting connection, which would become an important web for me. And that centered around the man you see to the left. Has anyone ever heard of Edward Lowenstein? He was a very important Greensboro architect for a lot of different reasons. He was very kind of into the mid-century modern, and he was also a member of the Jewish community. But he was also known for being one of the earliest white architects in town to hire women and black architects into his firm. So it was really a great connection for this, and he designed some really wonderful houses. Now, as fate would have it, I could cover this whole presentation as fate would have it, as fate would have it, Edward Lowenstein was also a professor at UNCG when it was Women's College. He had a class, it was a year long with about 20, 25 students, where they actually did everything to create what was known as a home management house. It was an over 2,000 square foot house. He brought in local architects, local builders to work with these students through this class to build this home. And they sold it. We've got all the papers to that too, and the scrapbook. So that was great to have this connection as well. And when we were talking to the Rotarians, as fate would have it, a lot of them were actually living in Lowenstein houses. Whoa. So I could actually go in and see some of the really great architectural houses. One that had all of the same furniture that it had originated, so period furniture, period drapes. And this one house had actually, they were so concerned with having the right drapes that when they were first made in the 50s, they made 2 sets. Archivally stored the second step, the drapes, and then were able to put those up 40 years later when they started to wear out. So that is something. Okay, so let's see. As fate would have it, he actually was very influential and became actually a prominent name in the Jewish Archives project as well, because he was related to so many people. We were able to get his papers, and that is another presentation where we ended up getting those. And they ended up at UNCG. So I'm low on time, so I'm going to run through this. So as fate would have it, Edward Lowenstein had 2 daughters, one of which went to Women's College, now of UNCG. So she was very involved in the community and has been very active and was very supportive of us getting all of his papers. So that's been a great connection too. And she is a member of, I'm sure we all have, this vast web of alumni that are involved with our colleges if we work there, or our institutions and the community. So that has been really wonderful too. And that connection has been through Rotary and through Lowenstein. So I've been like 4 minutes. So anyway, so
Can I stop you for a second, Kathleen?
maybe
I think what we're going to do, because of our technical difficulties, if this is okay with everybody, they're going to hit time, but we want to make sure they have time to do their presentation. So if you want to stay and listen to their presentation, because lunch is next. So is that okay with everybody? If you need to leave, we'll understand too. But
yes,
I'll be good for
I'll be
everybody.
I'm on the last 3 slides. So anyway, so just talking about alumni webbing, a lot of this goes into clubs and organizations. So through these alumni, we've been brought in to some great local clubs that they are involved in. And that includes garden clubs, and we have a lot of their scrapbooks, book clubs. I am, for some reason, really hot on the book club circuit right now. I don't know why, but I am going to a lot of book clubs. And through those, we've gotten donations too, paper donations and also financial donations. So that's been really great to form those connections as well. The DAR, and it's provided great outreach opportunities and also collection development opportunities as well. Also, we've really been able to successfully hook in with some of the retirement communities in Greensboro, which tie back to not only our alums, but also the professors that taught at UNCG. And they've also been very wonderful about supporting us through financial and collection donations as well. And finally, we also have alumni who are very involved in the local arts. We have a very large performing arts collection at UNCG, and they've really hooked us into where we have been able to get the collections from local theaters. And so that's been great too. We work on the Tanger Theater, but we've been doing very well with that too. Alumni also form this great community of programming people that you can hit up for things. So we had a great alum, Bergen Ross, who was in the Peace Corps in the 1970s. And she ended up coming and giving a great program and then basically gave us all of her African memorabilia. So that was great. We had a great exhibit, event participation. We don't have a friends group right now, but we are hoping to get one started again. And that is something that's very popular. We participate a lot in homecoming and alumni weekends. So we continue our connections through that. And finally, some of them like us so well that they want to volunteer. So we've had some great support through people really coming in and helping out processing collections or whatever we need. And finally, faculty webbing. So this again goes back to Stacey's project, where we were collaborating directly with Ann Parsons and the folks over in public history to do the Jewish Community Project. And they have also helped us in programming in our vast instructional outreach, and through another project we have, which is the North Carolina Literary Map, which tracks authors and books throughout the state of North Carolina, some of those which are faculty members of ours and alum. Okay, so I'm going to circle back to Beth Ann, where I like it one more time with the Rotary. So one of the Rotarians I interviewed was a man who, when I kind of going into it, he said, "You know, my mother went to Woman's Home." I said, "Who was that?" That was Susie Bain, Susie Winston Bain, who was one of our very favorite collection servers, one of our very favorite collections. And there she is right now. She was a WASP, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
And she was also his mother. So I stopped.
You did two things.
I know. And I stopped kind of talking about him, but I acted like she might have well been Joan Crawford, like, your mother's Susie Winston Bain. And then that's we kind of got an offshoot of that. So there she is, finally accepting her medal after all those years. That is in Beth Ann's collection. So I will segue to Beth Ann.
How much time?
We're at time, but
Oh,
you
wow.
keep going.
Okay.
That's what I said. If anybody needs to leave, but we're running into lunch, so
Okay.
we got like an hour for lunch.
Okay, so my name's Beth Koelsch.
And it's her birthday today.
It is
Happy
my
birthday.
birthday. Okay.
Gonna get her some cake.
All right. So I'm talking a little bit more personally about trying to get involved and network with a community, which I have no connection. So that's, I think, a pretty common thing for an archivist. It's like, so I got this job. Actually, I'm not gonna talk about me to begin with. Let me explain what this is and why. So, Women Veterans Historical Project, UNC-Greensboro, which is not really, it's like no military programs. We have about 750 collections. We do oral histories. I do oral histories and other people. We have, basically collecting the history of women who served in the U.S. military and the American Red Cross from World War I to the current day. So we are, we're getting used to this. Why there, it started as a university history project. There were a number of alumni, 40s who joined up. Women were essentially, I won't go into this, allowed to serve. You're allowed to serve in the military or become more involved when the men can't do it all. And then otherwise the men are like, this is my space. But fighting two fronts. So it started as that. And then women who received GI Bill benefits, white women also came. So it started with that and then just expanded. So the project started in 1999. I showed up in 2008. Well, they hired me. I didn't just show up. They can't get rid of me. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever had imposter syndrome. So this was my first archival job. I have no military background. No one, well, my uncles pretty much served, but that was about it. I didn't really know much about the military, except it was the military. I was interested in women's history and 20th century history. I was assigned to do oral histories, interviews, no experience in that. And one thing, and I'm sure this is in a lot of communities professions, there's so much jargon with the military, and each, everything's an abbreviation or jargon, and every branch does their, own thing. So it took me a while, because I actually am a very nervous person, to start admitting, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I've been doing this long enough that, I picked it up. It does help that I'm female. When this started, it was men doing the oral history interviews, and I do think there's a difference. So, okay, so this actually, all right. So the project started, and it's still a big thing. It started with a luncheon to honor the contributions of women in the military, and women have still are not really considered real parts of the military, and they don't really claim veteran status. So it started there, and when it first started, and then that was my responsibility. And when it first started, we had all these World War II and Korean era veterans that came to luncheon and gave me names of friends, and like this isn't that hard. So yay, that's great. Unfortunately, that was not a sustainable plan. We don't have any more World War II veterans. I always like to show this. This is Julia Gunn from Reedsville, and she passed on in 2021, but in 2017, she came wearing her World War II Navy uniform. So love Julia Gunn. But fewer of these women. And so I didn't really know what to do then. And another issue is the luncheon was paid for a long time out of this, one called slush fund, but this unrestricted fund. And then suddenly the dean's like, wait a minute, and suddenly I had to figure out how to pay for this. So these women were used to having a nice free lunch, which they were very grateful, acknowledging their presence, their contributions with the sit-down lunch, hooray. Oh gosh, now what do I do? Well, I started having to charge, and still like milk, loss leader. The price of the ticket didn't cover the luncheon. I personally, if I wanted to be clear, clear and not be in the hole for the budget, that would be great. But if I was getting a free luncheon for years and then suddenly like, can you pay $15? I mean, it really would have been like more like $40, $50, but I'd be like, no. So I don't blame them. So the attendance, besides losing all the World War II veterans, suddenly had to figure out how to make money. I was in a pickle. And I, had no natural, no history and natural proclivity for fundraising. Oh my, but that was just too bad. I really lucked out. Woman on the left there, Glenda Schillinger, UNC-G alum, also retired Air Force nurse, and she's staying with Deborah Barksdale, the current dean of the nursing school, in case you're wondering. And she just out of nowhere gave me $5,000. I'm like, oh, not me. And that actually started, and then with the strong encouragement of Kathelene, like, you need to start fundraising. So suddenly, what had been is we're funded by, my UNCG funds me and website, but in order to go out and do oral histories or purchase collections, it was just random donations. So this started the luncheon with, which was a big financial hit. We started doing sponsorships for tables, like, hey, if you give us this amount of money, you can have 8 seats. And then some people are like, well, I can't come, but I'll fund, so that allows it to be free now. So that was important. And it's gotten to the point where it's the biggest fundraising event in the library. And we're not in the red. We're not wildly rich, but we turn a profit. So okay, so as for filling the tables and meeting new veterans, there was a lot of I don't have connections, but it's not like, oh, my friend I was with basic training, but having an established, coming from an archives, depending on if the community trusts you, I keep things to myself, so I don't come in and go, in the 1980s I was protesting what the military was doing in Central America. I also have a lot of opinions, and I try to keep them to myself. That well, but so luckily, with the time, having, you find one person, because the other issue is like, oh, I've never heard of you. So having people like, oh, Robin Hamilton is on the top left. She's big schmoozer. Pearl Galloway is to the right, best smile ever. But these women actually are belong to an all women American Legion post, which is unusual. So, every year, sending it to people, but also trying to get involved with women's organizations or, so I've been pretty fortunate trying to get involved with UNCG student veterans. I've had different UNCG organizations, School of Nursing, alumni engagement, military affiliated services, the library, we make them, we don't make the library, we make sponsor a table, but, that also helps. So every year, still it's a scramble to fill the tables because, it's a good look to have people come. So, and the women veterans, it's a lot of work, but I enjoy it the day of because, women veterans are very excited and feel very appreciated. So I understand that holding the big luncheon is not really feasible or transferable skill. So what else do I do that, you might be able to do? I will go to every dang event I'm invited to. So it can be on the left, the Greensboro Museum had flashback to the 40s. And this is me smartly standing next to this guy. And on the right, this was a VA event. So for a while I was on the Daughters of American Revolution circuit. I don't quite know why I got and then why they no longer invite me. But, the Elks back in the day, garden clubs, which I've learned does not involve gardening necessarily. And I'm always bringing up to every event, even if they're not a veterans event, my little sign-up sheet and, have a table and try to get women involved. Like, hey, it's weird. It's like, hi, you don't know me. I would like to have your entire oral history, especially, some of the traumatic events that we're going to put on the internet. Cool. You were, but you weren't in the military, so not helpful. So in fact, here's an example. If any of you are women veterans or related to one or friends with one, please talk to me. I'd like to, because it's pretty ad hoc about how I get events. So if something is like, I've gone to funerals and birthday parties. This was this Marine veteran who has a horse farm, and I was invited to that and was very emotional. So I just played it cool and did not hit up people. So there are events where I'm a little classier. I also feel I've done a little bit of sacrifice. So this is student veterans. This is me eating cold chicken tetrazzini from an MRE meal, ready to eat. That was the most disgusting thing I've ever put in my mouth. But again, this was, student veteran on campus, doing a Veterans Day event. So I felt it was very important to get involved, show myself, having a track record of an established project is very helpful. And, I've been there for, I don't want to do the math, but, I've been there a long enough time that people know me. I finally have learned some of the jargon. All right, so just kind of wrapping it up, playing the long game. This is Rocky for people that know from the Philadelphia area. So Rocky is very important to my people. So you really just, it's that, meeting somebody who is part of a community, establishing, even though I'm not military and no one has ever heard of us, which is very frustrating, you need to establish that you're, not trying to mess them up, take advantage of them. Because we're asking a lot. Like, I, really want your story. And there's a lot of, oh, I didn't do anything important, or I didn't have a positive experience. You don't want my story. And I'm like, this is history. Like, we had a woman who's only in the military for 9 months because her mother signed her up. Like, she came home from high school. I still don't understand how that happened. So she's suddenly in the Army, and it didn't work out between both the Army and her. But, I'm like, this is important history. And I don't, we're not necessarily, sis boom ba, you go America. I just want your history. I've actually learned that it's a little tricky. There was this women veterans, I was up in Madison, Wisconsin, doesn't matter. Someplace in the Midwest for a conference. There's a women veterans group, and I'm like, hey, this is what I do. And she was like, people are always trying to get things from women veterans. Okay. So, a lot of that is just convincing. And, people might say they're interested and then renege because suddenly I want your life story. I do say we're not going to put anything on that you're on. So, it's not a gotcha thing. Keeping the door open. So I've been along for a while. Some woman actually called me an honorary veteran, which, very nice. If I interview you, I'm going to hug you probably then, unless I really hate everything you say. I keep my opinions to myself. I don't really talk about myself in the oral history interview. I actually learned that doing interviews for my master's thesis in library school, because I have a hard time not making jokes constantly. And I'm listening to the recordings going, oh my God, shut the hell up. So I've gotten better. It's not about me at all. So we ask questions, about some politics. Well, we don't talk about religion too much, feminism. And so I have many strong opinions, and I just learn to keep them myself. And this is with any general archivist. They don't even see it coming, if they're talking about the death of their spouse or with women in the military, there's a whole lot of sexual trauma. So, that can come up. So there's a lot of, and probably just even if you're not doing oral history, this is my mother's stuff. You just have to learn. There's a lot of just learning on the job. So finally, some final thoughts. I went up in Harris Teeter parking lot. This little lesbian couple's there, and on their bumper sticker, the woman's like, says she was a woman veteran. I'm like, they ran away, and I'm like, well, let's not do that anymore. Again, this is, everyone has said that, but if you can get an in of someone that likes you, it's pretty much the only way. If you're not part of the community, if you could get any help, if you're not a natural fundraiser, which I'm not sure the library and archivist circle and development and fundraisers, I'm not sure that Venn diagram has ever touched each other, but that's just too bad. So if you have an advancement person in your library or sorry, I keep forgetting not every person in the library. If people that are good at raising money, just put your hat in your hand and say, please help. Admit that most organizations have some jargon, and then finally, you get confident enough to go, that's great. I have no idea what that means. Be confident enough to do that. Be fine if someone doesn't want to share their materials or stories, even though you think it's great, and they would, it is their material, it is their life, and try not to take it personally. Some of us are better than others, and you're going to mess up. There's no way. It's a learning curve because there's just not a lot of training with, like you will learn, in library school or whatever, how to do a nice finding aid, but meeting people and being nice to them and them liking you enough to share their materials. That's learning curve. So that's how I did things. Still try to do it. I still mess up, but so everyone can go to lunch or have lunch.
Thank you all for
Thank you. Sorry.
Did anyone have any questions?
Oh, were there?
Or you can also have pastas while we're eating it.
Yeah.
Maybe that would
We're
be
not
good.
here in the Harris Teeter Park.
Yeah.
No, and we're not in the Harris Teeter Park.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.